Aaron Peterson, and we're continuing this incredible journey talking about what's possible in the kingdom. And this will be the fourth week that we've come back to Azusa Street and the ministry of William Seymour and just the amazing heritage that we get to carry and we get to walk in. And we're going to be really honest this week. We're not going to pull any punches. Azusa was an incredible move of God, changed history, like the birth of the Pentecostal movement. There are denominations that were birthed out of what happened at Azusa. Azusa did not necessarily end well. And I'm not here to critique or throw darts at the past. That's never what we're trying to do. But there are things that we can learn, and we should be learning. History is a phenomenal teacher. So we get to walk this out, and I think we get to pull a few really good keys out of what happened at Azusa, the way that the world responds to a move of God, and maybe more importantly, the way that the church responds to a move of God and incredible things that are happening. So buckle up, guys. We're going to have a really, I think, amazing, beautiful landing of the plane as we talk about Azusa, and then we'll jump into some new topics next week. Azusa Street changed the world. And I'll throw up some of the photos you guys have seen already. It was a small church movement. It was not a mega church. It was not a 30,000 stadium seating event. It was led in humility, led in passion, led in power, did some really incredible things. Like Seymour is this leader that just keeps coming up as a man of incredible integrity and humility. There was also profound attack that came against this movement. And you can go do a little bit of reading. Major news publications trashed Azusa constantly. There was this talk of a strange thing happening and these people speaking in weird languages. His tongues was being released in a profound kind of a way during Azusa. But it wasn't just the secular world that was making attacks. The church was responding really poorly to the things that were going on. And we have a habit of doing this. Just being real, we have a habit of doing this. But the thing that I want to press on, and we'll get to that, is I think there's three key takeaways that we need to be thinking about when it comes to a move of God and how we steward that. And I think the three pitfalls are the potential burnout of leaders is the first one. I think the second one is not having the capacity to hand the baton off well. And the third one is that we land in this pretty crazy place of, even though people are being pulled in, becoming inward focused instead of outward focused. And those three things really have the potential to pull our attention and pull our affection away from Him. And I think reach in and flip the power off when God is doing something incredible in our midst. So I'm not going to land in a place that says we can stop God from doing things. That would be crazy to say. But there's times that we posture our heart really poorly. Everyone is so excited about, this kind of stuff. We're so excited about miracles, signs, wonders, flame above the building. We talked last week about how the cops got called constantly because people thought the building was on fire. I don't think folks realize the toll that it could take on leaders, especially to sustain something like constant meetings while God is doing things. I've always had this theory that said there has to be a grace. There has to be a grace that goes with it. I remember being at the Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, I think in 2014, and I had already pastored for a long time. I was learning different lessons, I think, than everybody else in the room was, maybe necessarily. And one of the things that struck me is there's a day that Chris Valentin showed up to speak, and he looked haggard. He came in, hair disheveled, Walking Dead kind of a look when he came up, and he spoke for 2 hours, did Q&A, and then he left. And I said something to one of the other people near me, what was up with Chris today? It wasn't that he was off his game. He just looked like mud. He looked like he had been through the ringer. And they said he was just on a 2-week ministry trip overseas. He just spent 2 weeks of constant meetings pouring in overseas. They said he flew back from somewhere in Central Asia today, landed at the airport, drove to the school, preached for 2 hours, and now he's going home. And that was the point where I went, I don't know if I want this. I've had this dream of like in my younger days in ministry, I had these like really profound, I'm going to go do this stuff and I'm going to do all this itinerant. And I heard that and went, do I really want it? That sounds insane to me. Like, what does this actually look like to walk this out? There has to be a grace. There has to be a grace to be able to do it. But beyond that, we are talking about a very real demand of self-sacrifice. And if leaders, if pastors are the only ones that are driving the move of God, the things that are moving forward, it will fail. It will fail because we will land in a line where all of a sudden we're putting our families on the altar. It will land in a place where all of a sudden our kids are suffering, our wives or our husbands are suffering, like as if the team, if the men and women that are on staff at the church are the only ones driving and pushing and carrying, it's a recipe for disaster. We've actually already lit the fuse, and eventually it's going to blow up. Burnout is real, and this is part of the call on the church, like the role of the fivefold, and I would just say the role of general ministry is we're equipping the body to do the work of ministry. If the staff is the only one doing it, it gets crazy. And I think we see that as time goes on in Azusa, there's real burnout happening. Like there's real burnout happening. It's really hard to sustain. And we get prophetic words here all the time. We hear things like, we're going to have 40 days of constant meetings or 20-some days of constant meetings. This is one of the things God is going to do. I cringe every time I hear it. God will maybe do that at some point, but I go instantly, I don't want to spend 21 days going to bed late and getting up early and being away from my family and having to dump a bunch of extra stuff on my wife to care for my daughter. There would have to be a grace. Something massive would have to come in to underpin that to make it possible. So that's the first one of these things is burnout's real. Burnout's real. Secondly, a movement becomes a monument when we can no longer celebrate what God is doing in another place. A movement will become a monument when we can no longer celebrate what God is doing in another place. And this isn't so much just an Azusa thing. This is just a general guideline. We've seen this over and over again in history. A ministry, a character, a team that has been at the core of a move of God will have, I believe, an epic season. I believe a mega grace moment where they can either hand the baton and hand the impartation to another move that's happening in support, or they can try to cling on tightly and they almost become critics and experts instead of active participants in what God is doing. And we saw some of this stuff happen toward the end of Azusa. And I'm not picking on anybody. I'm not throwing darts or throwing stones at anybody, but the way that Azusa started, it didn't necessarily finish. And we talked in the first video about how the beginning of Azusa was this incredible like racial reconciliation that was going on, and there were African Americans and Caucasians and Hispanics and all kind of like every race you could imagine is together, and they're worshiping in fire and in glory in a time period where it was really, really uncommon to have this. And by the end, the congregation in Azusa was pretty much one color. And leadership had become pretty much one color. And that initial drive had sort of fallen away. And some of that is the result of church judgment coming in. There were people that were parts of other moves of God that like criticized Seymour to his face, that didn't like the idea that we had blacks and whites worshiping together in the same congregation. And I think those seeds ended up being sown deep and becoming a part of the power going out of this movement. And it's crazy to think about, because today, I don't think anybody watching this video would go, oh yeah, that was very controversial. We maybe should have segregated congregations. Like, we all know that it's nuts. In that time period, what God was doing at Azusa was new. It was new and it was different, and I think there was a lot of failure that happened. And how do we steward a manifestation of the kingdom that really looks like the kingdom? How do we steward a manifestation of the kingdom that doesn't really look like the way the world is doing things right now? And we have to be careful about that. We have to figure out the way to walk this out. Azusa is not the only example of this kind of poor baton-wielding kind of stuff. I'm not trying to trash anybody again, but John Wimber, we'll talk about him at some point. Incredible man of God, could not handle the things that were happening at the Father's Heart outpouring in Toronto, and went into a place of being critical of what was happening instead of participating in what was happening. There's always going to be a temptation for us to believe that we're the center, we're the linchpin, we're the most important thing, and to curse the next move, to curse the next group of people that are being called to step in. And man, if we could pull off unity, if we could actually all be in a heart posture place where we go, there's another church in Green Bay that is experiencing an outpouring of God, and be excited for them genuinely, I think that would be like a secret sauce that would break some of the ceilings that we bump up against. So we have to get better at celebrating the victories. We have to get better at dodging this profound temptation to get sucked into that I'm now a critic and an expert versus a participant thing. Like, we have to figure this out, because it's a killer. It's just an absolute killer. It's an absolute killer. So we talked burnout. We talked about baton passing. Being inward focused is the other really important thing that we have to keep an eye on, and that's this idea that the miracles are just going to draw people, so we don't really have to do anything outside the church. The miracles are just going to draw people. What happens if the miracles stop? What if we lose our capacity to share the things that God is doing, like Azusa did? Their primary functional ability to share what was happening inside the building was the newspaper that they were putting out regularly that included the testimonies and all the cool things that God was doing. When they couldn't do that anymore, they organically, naturally started to become inward focused. And I've heard preachers say, and I've said it myself, that if the Holy Spirit's moving in a place, you could dig a moat around it and people will find their way in. Like, I still believe that, but there's a very real, genuine, authentic call. It's the Great Commission. We're called to go out. We're not just called to stay in, and we have to figure that out. Like, we have to figure that out, because as the apostolic and the prophetic and as the supernatural has really been embraced and restored in a profound way by, like, mainline church culture, the pendulum has swung to a place where I don't think we empower the evangelistic anointing the way that we need to. And the answer is not just that we change culture. If culture change was enough to save the world, then Jesus would have been a community organizer. We're talking about people out there are actually dying. They're actually experiencing hell on earth right now, and the hope of the gospel lives inside of you. The reality and the hope of the gospel lives inside of you. And our church cultures, and not just the Elevation, the church culture as a whole, I think has started to burn out on the hyper-evangelistic thing. The answer is not that we just don't do evangelism anymore. The answer is not that we stop sending people out. The answer is not that we stop sharing the gospel and sharing our faith. And we need to sort that. Like, we need to sort that, because the second the needs of the people in the congregation begin carrying a way greater weight than those that need to be saved and pulled in from the hell that they're living in right now. I think we're in a danger zone when that starts to happen. So we can't burn out. We have to figure out how to raise up Timothys, to raise up other leaders that can shoulder the burden. That's why we're so focused on teams here in this church, because we want to have many hands that can pick up the burden that God has handed us. We need to be able to walk that out. We need to be able to celebrate what God is doing, even if it's in context that we don't understand and in ways that we don't understand. And we need to land in a place where we don't get so inward focused that we become a dead sea that has no outflow, that has no capacity to sustain life anymore. So as we wrap this portion of this video series, this teaching, whatever this thing is up, I just want to challenge you guys to be praying about those three things. God, where is there a place that you're calling me to serve and to serve well and to help lift up and undergird the move of God that is happening right here in Green Bay at Elevation Church and other places? God, what are you calling me to do to participate? God, what can I celebrate that's happening outside these four walls? What can I celebrate that's happening in other contexts? Is my heart in a place of strength yet where if a move of God starts happening at a church where I disagree with some of their ideology or theology, can I still be happy for them? And God, what are you calling me to do to reach out? What's the call here, God? Is it social media? Is that the place that I'm supposed to be an outflow out? Am I supposed to do the real work of the evangelist and maybe not do treasure hunts, maybe not plan and block out times where I'm going to go and just hunt for people, but is there a way that in my day-to-day life I can start to encourage, I can start to pour fire on people that need fire poured on them? Can I start somewhere to make it more about reaching out to the ones that are lost and hurting than just caring for the sheep that are already here? I think pray about those three things. Really press, because the painful, hard reality is that we are constantly given opportunities to adjust, to stay within the fresh rhema breath of what God is doing. And the second we stop adjusting to keep flowing with him, we are in danger of becoming a monument instead of a movement. So I love you guys. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of this journey together. And I can't wait to see you next week. Bye.